I know it's hard to believe, but summer is winding down. And of course, on a travel show, winter and spring are only a flight away. It might be time to refresh your wardrobe with new items for the season ahead or the season you're traveling to. Quince nails it with luxury essentials that feel effortless and look polished, perfect for layering and mixing. Their styles are versatile, you're going to be reaching for them again and again. Think chic cashmere and cotton sweaters starting from just $40, washable silk tops, and classic denim pants. You've heard me rave about my travel pants, and I'm still traveling with them. And now I have two pairs. The best part, everything at Quince is half the cost of similar brands by working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middleman. Quince gives you luxury without the markup. Elevate your fall wardrobe essentials with Quince. Go to quince.com/traveler for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Thanks for selling your car to Carvana. Here's your check.
Whoa, when did I get here?
What do you mean?
I swear it was just moments ago that I accepted a great offer from Carvana online. I must have time traveled to the future.
It was just moments ago. We do same-day pickup. Here's your check for that great offer.
It is the future.
It's the present and just the convenience of Carvana. Sorry to blow your mind.
It's all good. Happens all the time.
Sell your car the convenient way to
Carvana.
Pickup times may vary and fees may apply.
Amateur Traveler, episode 957. Today, Amateur Traveler talks about sloths and snakes, toucans and tarantulas, monkeys and macaws, as we cruise the Peruvian Amazon with G Adventures. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about the Amazon. This is another solo episode for the last trip of the summer for me and what was a busy travel summer. And that was a trip that I did with G Adventures. And we've talked about G Adventures small group travel on the show many times before, and also mentioned it because that's the vendor behind the Amateur Traveler 2026 trip to Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. But this was a trip that I did with them that was a sponsored trip, so they were paying for my tour, although not flights for this particular outing. And it was a 9-day trip called Amazon Riverboat Adventure in Depth. And so this was a roughly 24-person trip where you meet your small group in Lima. You all fly together from Lima to Iquitos, Peru, and then you get on a boat, in our case, the Amarista, and explore the region of the Amazon and two tributaries of the Amazon for most of a week, and then get back at a plane, fly from Iquitos to Lima, and then go on with whatever your adventures are, in my case, fly home. This wasn't a specific trip that G Adventure suggested. This was me looking at their entire catalog of trips, which takes a while. They've got a lot of things that I wanted to do, had some trouble deciding, but this was the trip I picked, and it is a unique and special trip. And I highly recommend it. Before we get there, though, let's talk about who this trip is not for. If you don't have a sense of adventure, this trip is not for you. You're in the Amazon. I'll tell you why I thought it was easier than I thought it would be, but again, still, sense of adventure required. And then also, if you're looking for a luxury trip, this trip is also not for you. I thought the level of quality was great, but there are a few quirks in my cabin, like the floor sloped and hot water was a little harder to get than I would like. If you're interested in a luxury trip, then G Adventures does trips with National Geographic that are a higher level of luxury, and so look for those trips instead. That being said, I love the trip, great level of comfort for me, and easier than I thought it would be. We'll talk more about that as we go on. So the trip started, as I said, in Lima. I added a airport pickup to get me to the Radisson Red Hotel in the Miraflores region of Lima, which we've talked about on the show before, a very touristy region. I did not do a lot of things other than work the day that I got there. I got there just after midnight of a day that we would meet up at 5:30 p.m. with the rest of the group. So I still really haven't seen Lima. I did not add anything else to this trip, although I would say at least half of my fellow travelers were adding on something else while they were down in Lima or down in Peru, like Machu Picchu, obviously. In Lima, when the group met, we met with what G calls your CEO, but this person would not come with us on the trip. So they really just got us to the airport, and then a different one would pick us up from the airport at the end of the trip. We did get some advice, like don't drink the water, don't take a cab, they don't have meters, call an Uber or the equivalent instead, and don't change your money at the airport. A little late for that. You can get better rates elsewhere or get your money out of an ATM. And then dinner is not included that first night, but it is for all the nights on the boat, obviously, or meals are included. In the morning, we made an 8:30 start to get on a plane to go to Iquitos. Our flight wasn't until about noon, but the traffic's not great in Lima, and so it takes about 50 minutes from Miraflores up to the airport. We've talked about Peru before on Amateur Traveler many times. We've talked about the Amazon region at least once or twice on the show, although I would have to say that my first surprise is I did not realize how much of Peru is rainforest. And here's Eric, one of our two naturalists, at one of the lectures where we were learning about the area.
First of all, when we refer to Peru, you come down to Peru, probably you just choose the rainforest in Peru. Not thinking about what's really in there, all right? But this, from the point that you just chose Peru, you should know that Peru is one of the most biodiverse countries in the world. And not only because of the cultural stuff, but as well because we got the rainforest and basically, so from the Peruvian country, so the rainforest in Peru occupies the 60% of the territory. And 30% is occupied by the mountains and Andes. And 10% is the coastline. So from that point of view, we are going to see that Peru also holds approximately 84 of the ecosystems out of the 108 ecosystems existing in the world. So then we talk about microclimates. And when we talk about microclimates, we are talking about 32 microclimates in the world recognized, and Peru has 28 of those. So think about that, and the place where we are is so biodiverse.
Peru is a little bigger than I was thinking because it's near the equator, so on a Mercator projection map, it looks smaller. If you're from the US, it's roughly twice the size of Texas, 3 times the size of California, a little smaller than Alaska, or 9 times the size of New York. If you're from Western Europe, it's bigger than all the major Western European countries, and just the region of Laredo, which is northeastern Peru, and that's where Iquitos is just slightly smaller than the country of Germany. It's more than twice the size of France, but with half the population. When you go to Iquitos, you're going to fly in. Well, technically, you could also drive in to the closest town on the river that you can drive to, but then you would still be about 5 or 6 days on the river till you would get to Iquitos. It is one of the most isolated cities in the world. It does not connect by roads to other cities, but the population in this region is about 1 million people. Iquitos is not connected by road to the outside world, but it is connected to the port city of Nauta. And so we took a bus 90 kilometers from Iquitos to this one city on the one road out of Iquitos. And that's where we got on the boat. And here's Victor, the other naturalist, talking about the first part of our trip.
We came from Iquitos to Nauta City by the only highway we have, which is 97 paved kilometers from Iquitos to here. And it's the only road we have. I call it interior road because besides this road, we have no other roads at all connecting us with the outside world, not at all. So Iquitos is so isolated. Nauta is located in one side of Marañón, on the right side of Marañón River.
The biggest surprise we had for the whole trip we had when we got to the river. And that is, I did not realize how much the water level changes in the Amazon between the flood season and the non-flood season. So the high water season and the low water season. We were there in late July into early August, and the water was receding. It had come down half of the amount that it would drop from the high water season to the low water season so far.
How many meters do you think water receded so far? 6 meters more or less in some point, 4.5 in some other places, depending on the level where we are, but varies, let's say 4.5, 6 meters. That's why in Peru we say 8 to 12 meters, the fluctuation of water in Peru, but down in Brazil, 15 meters in Brazil, a lot more, a lot higher. 13 years ago, we got the highest level of water ever happened in our recorded history. It was about 2 extra meters of water. This year, a little bit more than 1. So it's a lot of water that people were not expecting. And water is receding a lot. You will see during this 7-day trip, you will see how much water will be receding. If it doesn't rain at all, water will recede a lot. We'll see the difference between today until Saturday.
So if you picture that the level of the river is going to drop something like a total of 10 meters or 30 feet, that means that when we got to Nata to get to the skiffs, which are the small boats, I say small boats, they're more than 20 feet long, that we're going to use to get around on this particular trip. When we got on the skiffs to go out to the Amatista, the boat that we were going to be staying on, we had to go down at least a 20 feet muddy bank. And there were some stairs that were built there. Every time we got out of the river and went to go to a village, for instance, we had to go up to some stairs that had been rebuilt. They have to rebuild them every year and have to keep rebuilding them as the water keeps dropping. And this affected everything we saw. That annual flooding and receding of the water is related to so many things on this trip. It's related to where people live. It's related to the houses they build. It's related to the crops that they plant. It keeps coming back to, are you in the high water season or the low water season? On the far bank from Nata, the markings on the trees for where the high water gets to, or where it got to this season, is 10 feet up. And so that entire bank is underwater in the high water season. Not only that, but most of the whole reserve that we will go to is underwater several months of year. And that reserve is called the Pacaya Samiria Reserve. And it's in between the river here that Nata's on, the Marañón, and the next river over, which will join to form the Amazon, and that's the Ucayali River.
The black point we see right in between these two big rivers called Marañón and Ucayali forms the Pacaya Samiria National Reserve, which is the second largest reserve in South America and the largest reserve in Peru.
So the extension of the land that we have here is basically equivalent to 5 million acres. If we talk about in kilometers or hectares, we are talking about 2,080,000 square hectares of rainforest protected in this part of Peru. We are talking about northeast of Peru. And this is the National Reserve, Pacaya and Samiria.
And Eric explains that this national reserve is part of the Ucumara Depression, and that's why it's flooding.
If you read the geology books and talks about the Amazon, you will read the Ucumara, or you will read about the Ucumara Depression. And that's what we got over here. What is the elevation that we have in here compared to the ocean? So we are talking about like 115 meters above sea level. It's a little bit over than 300 feet above sea level. But the Ucumara is named in that way because it's lower. It's much lower than the rest of the area. For that reason, every time we got the high water season, out of the 2,080,000 hectares of rainforest that we have in the National Reserve, during the high water season, only 5% of that particular area will remain dry land. Only 5%. That means 95% of that terrain will be underwater for at least 5 months in a year. You just imagine what is the impact based on the species that we have, terrestrial species that we have in the National Reserve. So they will be reduced to a very small amount of land where you have to survive for the next 5 months. We know these places, they are very deep in the forest, especially in the heart of the National Reserve. How big the National Reserve is almost the size of Slovenia and also 50% of Costa Rica. This is a very important reserve that we have in Peru. In terms of flora, we got 965 plant species, 56 cultivated species, and also we got approximately like 500 species of birds. In 1 week, it's possible to see in this area of the National Reserve over 370 species of birds. So we had the chance to travel with the American Birding Association looking for birds. You just imagine in only 1 week, we were able to see over than 370 species out of the 500 species that is found in this National Reserve.
And that's enough preamble for now. Let's talk about what we actually did. The first thing we did is we sailed down the Marañón River to the Amazon. And we actually spent very little time on the Amazon itself.
So as soon as we got Nauta, everybody was on board on La Matista. Then we, in coordination with the captain, we decided to move the boat coming down Marañón River to San Joaquin de Omaguas. We spent the night, our first night. We keep moving a little bit down Amazon River. When I say down, it's coming up north. That's the way how the Amazon River flows, south to north until Iquitos. That's why I'm saying down river, but it's actually going up north. From San Joaquin Point, we move down until this point where you see these little black points, which are islands. There is a little tributary over there called Llana Yacu. Llana means black in Quechua. It's Yacu, it's water. Llana Yacu. Llana black, Yacu water. Black Water River. That's the river we explored today in the morning, where we got to see the macaws. We got to see some monkeys, our first monkeys. We got to see some long-nosed bats. We got to see some great egrets. We got to see snowy egrets, smaller ones. What else did we see around this area? Sloths. We got to see one or, let's say two. Two sloths at a distance because water receded. Yeah, water receded a lot. That's why the strong current along the Llana Yacu River. And that river won't be explorable anymore within a few more weeks. Who knows, maybe 2 more weeks or maybe within a month. So our boats won't be able to go through and do the explorations around this area. Not at all. No. Our boats are too big for that little. We'll be remaining only little and very shallow. A foot, 2 feet deep. That's it. So there's a big difference from one season to another.
So imagine that as you're planning this trip as the crew and the naturalists, you have to change the trip every week depending on the level of the water and what you can see. That first full day on the river, as Victor said, we started in the small tributary of Yanayaku, the Blackwater River. And this started the regular rhythm of the week that we spent on the boat, or the Monday through Friday that we spent on the boat, where we would go out maybe 2 or 3 times during the day for different expeditions. Some would be looking for wildlife. On this first day, for instance, we went out early in the morning. I think it was before breakfast, the first one, or just after. Sun would come up at 6 a.m. It would go down at 6 p.m. So you have 12 hours of daylight. And then we did a village visit, and then later on we did a night excursion. As we're going up the Yanayaku, we're dividing up the group. The group ranged from 23 to 26 people. Most of the week it was 23 people, but the first few days there was another Peruvian family of 3 that also joined us. And we split the group between 2 different skiffs. The skiffs are over 20 feet long. I believe that you could hold all 26 people on one skiff. So there was plenty of room to spread out on the skiffs and have your binoculars there and your camera with your telephoto lens and your water bottle and your hat and all of those things with you. We went up the Blackwater River to a couple of Oxbow lakes. So an Oxbow lake is a lake that is past the bend in the river. The water in the lake was also black water, and what that means is plant life has fallen into the river and died and has released tannins. So the color of the river is kind of the color of a cup of tea. Now, there is no place in the Amazon that we saw or in this region where there was good visibility in the water. It was either a yellow water river, as they say, which for me would be brown, muddy water, or it was these black water rivers that are filled with tannins. But at least in the time of year we were there and the water sources we saw, all of the water is rather opaque. And then we started seeing wildlife. And this is one of the big reasons that you come on a trip like this is the wildlife. And so on the very first one we saw egrets and vultures and weaver birds' nests and herons and the car alarm bird, which sounds like a car alarm. I think the scientific name is black-capped Donacobius. There was also a donkey bird who sounded just like a braying donkey, and that would be the horned screamer. We saw breadfruit trees, which are not native to the Amazon but were introduced. We saw holes in the banks. Remember, you've got these banks that are coming up from where the water has receded, and in these banks, there were holes, and those were catfish nests, abandoned, obviously, because now that the water has come down past that. This is a very good time of year for the locals to do fishing. And so we saw people out there with their poles or their nets at various trips, including this first one. And the reason for that is when the water is high, the fish can actually hide in the jungle, right? Because there's water 10 feet up the trees. And so the fish spread out. And with 95% of the natural reserve, where we'll spend most of our time, not this first trip, underwater, there's a lot of places for the fish to hide. And so it isn't until the water starts to recede that there's good fishing. And so both the locals are out as well as dolphins are having a great time fishing, and some fishing birds like cormorants are also having a very successful time in this time of year. We saw paper wood trees, which is a fast-growing tree that is grown commercially for paper. We saw neon tetrafish, Oscar fish. I'm spending a lot of time trying to do nature photography from the boat, and it's something that I really enjoy, but it's not easy to do. I talked about my experience and showed some of the photos that I took in the latest Amateur Traveler weekly newsletter. Certainly, some of the wildlife is close enough that you can photograph it with your iPhone, but with most of the birds that we're seeing or the monkeys in the trees, it is helpful to have a camera with a good zoom lens. I did not bring my SLR, as I don't tend to anymore because it's heavier, but I have a kind of a sub SLR camera, a Canon camera with a built-in 60 times optical zoom lens. If you're thinking about what camera to bring, you're going to have to do a lot of zooming in to see things. You're also going to want to shoot in burst mode because you're going to be hand holding these things, and a lot of your photos are going to be out of focus, or you're going to miss that flying bird. And you're going to want to have a good manual focus option because sometimes that bird is just behind that branch and your autofocus is going to catch the branch and miss the bird. And that was one thing I was having a little more trouble with. The Canon camera I brought doesn't have a great easy manual focus option on it. There's also some low light photography, so think about that also. You're really not set up from the boat to have a tripod or a monopod, so you're really just going to be hand holding. And what that means is you can see my photos. All the photos that I took will be linked from the show notes. All the photos I take on all my trips are up on the website. But what you're not seeing are the 80% of the photos, at least 80% of the photos that I deleted because it was out of focus or I missed that shot. And that's really just the essence of wildlife photography. If you want to be a better photographer, delete most of your photos before you show them to people. And that's what I did, particularly on this trip. You don't have to take photos, obviously, but if you're not going to be taking photos, you definitely are going to want a nice set of binoculars. Don't have to be big. The small binoculars that I had work great. They're in my regular packing list if you're interested in what I use, and that's on the website. Because the animals might be at the top of the tree. So, for instance, on that first trip, the boat that I was in saw sloths 2 different times, but they're not right next to you. They're way up in the top of a tree. And when you're trying to spot those monkeys, for instance, the binoculars or a zoom lens were really helpful for that. We did see monkeys on this very first trip. We saw spider monkeys, so small monkeys. They don't like to pose. They like to scurry around. So I don't have a lot of photos of monkeys from this trip, even though we saw them on numerous occasions. We also heard the black caracara bird, and some of the local bird names are the cry that they make, and the caracara is one of those. That is the sound that it makes. We saw long-nosed bats. They were sleeping for the day just up against a tree, and bat falcons, which hunt them. We also saw a variety of trees like the fire ant tree. We heard a rather gruesome story of when they were harvesting rubber during colonization, when they were forcing the local natives to gather rubber. If somebody didn't gather enough rubber, they may be tied to a fire ant tree with no good results there. But it is a big, beautiful tree with brownish flowers at the top. And one of my favorite photos that I took that probably will end up in the show notes was an egret spreading its wings at the top of this fire ant tree against a very blue sky. Our guides, Victor and Eric, were so funny because Eric, for instance, I was in his boat. He's been doing this for 20 years, but he still gets very excited. Take a picture, shoot that. We saw a large black bird in the goose family, whose name I did not capture. The little monquita, which is a bird that looks like it's wearing a habit. So that's monquita would be none. Butterfly bird, black vultures. I have a picture of a king vulture, which is a little larger. We saw trees in the balsa family, which reminds me that one of the first things I saw when I got up that morning was a balsa raft, a long balsa raft with a little tent on it sailing down the river, which is a very traditional way that people would bring their goods to market. And some people still do. We saw kapok trees, which were harvested in World War II and used to fill life jackets. And I mentioned that we saw 2 sloths. And that reminds me that there is a superstition in the Amazon that a pregnant woman should not be allowed to see a sloth or her child might behave like a sloth. One of the biggest surprises that was evident right away is the weather was not as oppressively hot or sticky as I expected. So this is an area where the weather in Fahrenheit goes from about 60 to 90 degrees all year round. And maybe during the same day, you'll wake up and it'll be 70 degrees. And then during the heat of the day, it'll go up to 90. But especially when you're going around on the boat, you're getting a breeze. And as long as you're in the shade, and a lot of these, as you're going up these narrow little inlets, you're in the shade much of the time. When you're in the shade, it didn't feel that hot. And really, it was just when we did a couple jungle hikes later in the trip that I really felt the humidity. But I had expected to see more mosquitoes, to be more hot and sticky. I had expected the weather to be more of an issue.
USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks, or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Visit USAA.com/bundle.
Bundle savings are off total premium, not available in all states or in all situations. To qualify, auto policy must be active prior to property policy issue, subject to change. Restrictions apply. Membership eligibility and product restrictions apply and are subject to change. USAA means United Services Automobile Association and its affiliates, San Antonio, Texas.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? Well, with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills. Wait, did I say job title yet? Get started today and see how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
And we did see our first macaws in this very first trip. Beautiful, beautiful birds, colorful birds. They can live up to 100 years long. They are endangered because they sell for $5,000 on the black market. And the problem is, too, if you capture a macaw, they mate for life. And so both the one you captured and its mate will be taken out of the gene pool. So those are all things we saw on this very first skiff ride, which was no more than 2 hours long. And I probably did not capture everything we saw because I was trying to take notes and take pictures at the same time.
Now, the boat is moving, coming up Amazon River, going south. Again, a little bit confused. Going south to the confluence, Marañón-Ucayali River. Ucayali actually means canoe breaker. Ucayali is, and the Marañón means cashew nut. So let's say cashew nut joins with the canoe breaker river and forms the Amazon. And the meaning of the Amazon is, etymologically, it's called Amazos. That means without a breast.
Okay, and why the river is named to be without a breast needs a little explanation. But the Spanish explorer, Francisco de Orellana, said in his journals that he fought bands of women warriors on the river in 1542. And this reminded him of the ancient Amazons of Greek myth. So he's the one who named the river, and he named it Rio de las Amazonas. Amazon means without breast because in Greek myth, these women warriors would cut off one breast so that they could more effectively use a bow. This was not true of the warriors that he was fighting, but that's where the name comes from. One can assume that the river that's named after the cashew nut had cashew nuts along it. And I assume that somewhere along the Canoe Breaker River, you don't want to be in a canoe, but not on the portions that we were on. Our next adventure was a village visit.
We're going to be stopping there and do the village visit. It's going to be the first interaction with the local people. Eric already explained to you. You came down here not only to see flora and fauna environment, as well, G Adventures also focus on the local people, culture of the Amazonian people. So we're going to be interacting with them. We're going to be talking to them. We're going to be exchanging maybe conversation from English into Spanish. If you know a little bit of Spanish, it's going to be a good opportunity to practice it a little bit more. But I tell you ahead of time, people don't speak really Spanish around this part of Peru. We speak a colloquial Spanish, which is a big mix of different dialects, including Quechua, Portuguese, and also Spanish. It's a big mix. Sometimes it's so difficult to understand them. We do understand them, so that's okay, no problem. You will see that time looks stopped because still living pretty much as my ancestors were living hundreds of years ago. People are still living pretty much like that in the rainforest. Rustic buildings, houses for them. They'll live on the still houses because they know these places will be eventually flooded. Water will be there. And this year, the level of water overpassed the floor of their houses. Like a foot, in some other places, maybe 2 feet. Yeah, overpassed the level of water, no? So people didn't expect that much. So houses could be in good condition, 5 years, 4 years, and then they have to repair it. 13 years ago happened a big problem, but people repaired their buildings only for a couple of years. And they never expected that within 13 years later was going to happen again. This usually happened every 60 years. Happened this year again, according to scientists, because the global warming causing all this problem. A lot more snow caps melting, happening in the Peruvian Andes, and all this water later on comes and fill up the low Amazon.
Eric addressed the question of who does live here. Some people actually live in the reserve, and then some people live in the buffer zone around it.
Like 40,000 people and 50,000 in the buffering zone. And these are the people who actually are allowed to live in the buffering area of the National Reserve. There are some words that we use to refer to our people. When you say river people, so it means with this, people who got a mixture already. Could be mestizos or could be intertribal mixture, but they live along the river. So then we call them ribereños or river people. But when we say indigenous people, or basically ethno-linguistic families, so we are talking about pure tribes or people who didn't mix yet. And this is the case of the Cucamas, Shipibos, Conibos, Quichuas. They still living in this area. They still conserving their traditions. So they are not mixing much. So they are basically going through a very hard time to keep their language and to keep the tradition and culture. You know why? Because basically the globalization and all the stuff is reducing the number of this. And since the government is not giving them the proper attention or value to these tribes, so they are about to disappear. In some cases, we are working on the idea of tourism that has to do also with ecotourism to come and visit or expose these people to tourism. So in that way, we also can protect or encourage them to protect their culture, their language. Otherwise, it will be very hard to keep the language and culture of many of our people in the Amazon rainforest. The people who are allowed to live in the buffering area basically are native people. People from other countries or other places of Peru are allowed to come and live in this area? No. It has to be from this particular area.
To set some expectations, it's not like you're going out to a primitive tribe. If you saw some of these people in town, you wouldn't know that they're from a river village at all. Their houses are a little more rustic than mine, and if I were rebuilding my house every few years, mine would probably also be more rustic. And theirs are more open to ventilation, so not a lot of glass windows, but a lot of open ventilation. The roofs are either tin roofs or they're the traditional thatched roofs from palm fronds, but the palm fronds are a little harder to get these days and don't last quite as long as the tin roofs, so you're seeing more of the tin roofs these days. And then, as we said, they're all on stilts because you never know how high the water is going to get. The particular village that we went to, we met the mayor and we met another person who is in charge of one of the projects that they're doing there. So they had two different projects in this village to try and better their lot in life. One was they were raising bees, stingless bees, as it turns out, for the honey. So there were hives all over the place. They were also raising butterflies to reintroduce some butterflies that were endangered. Right now they have a butterfly house, but eventually we'll reintroduce these into the jungle. Some of the members of our group were able to release butterflies that were just ready to be released. It's interesting walking around the village. There were some solar panels in the area. There was also a water filtration plant that had been built by Engineers Without Borders to try and give them better drinking water. They collect a lot of rainwater, and you're in the rainforest, so you get rainwater. They also had some interesting pets. We saw one kid who had a parakeet, one child who had an adorable baby sloth. Not that I'm encouraging you to go out and get a sloth because they are illegal for export and really aren't supposed to be held as pets, but they are in some of these remote villages. It was adorable. And one of the reasons why people like sloths as pets is they sleep half the day. They also only poop once a week. And that is a defense mechanism because a sloth will climb down from its tree so that it can find a place to poop and then bury it so that it doesn't just drop its poop from the tree and therefore have a stinky way for predators to find it. The other interesting story we learned about sloth poop is that sloths are fairly solitary animals. And when a mother sloth thinks that her baby is ready to live on its own, one of the last things she will do is force feed it a little bit of her poop to build up the gut biome that baby will need to digest the food that it will eat. Interesting, useful, and just a little gross. The village had about 120 people. They were raising yucca or tapioca, chickens, also raising chickens. They were raising chickens, and they were also raising yucca or tapioca. And one of the challenging things in this area is your growing season is roughly 3 or maybe 5 months as the water recedes. So they will go out to the sandbars in the river. They will plant rice and beans and corn and such in the very rich soil that has come down the river. You could do more planting in terra firma, that 5% of the land that doesn't flood, but that soil is not as rich, won't grow things as readily. I did like that one of the people on the trip, I think related to the baby sloth, said, honestly, we could go home now and I would be happy. We're only 2 activities into this whole trip at this point. And then we did a night outing.
We'll be looking maybe for night monkeys. We're going to be looking maybe for reptiles, maybe snakes. Tonight, millions of mosquitoes tonight. For sure, you have to wear long pants, long sleeves, shorts, and covered shoes because a lot of mosquitoes. The worst time for the mosquitoes in the Amazon is from 6 to 8, 2 hours of main activities for them. They're so active. During 2 hours, they look for fresh blood. They're so smart. And so mosquitoes will be eating you, maybe. We have to be prepared, spraying the mosquito repellent, especially on the arms or in the neck. No malaria around this area, chicos. You don't have to be concerned about it.
I had expected mosquitoes. I did get some mosquito bites, although I did wear long sleeves almost the whole trip, so not too bad. Some of my mosquito bites were like the back of my hand, because I was wearing long pants the whole week. I did not wear shorts at all, even though sometimes it was warm enough to wear shorts. What surprised me, though, was when Victor said, and Eric also said the same thing, that really there isn't malaria endemic in this region. There is in Iquitos and further downstream. But we met with a woman who was a shaman and asked her what kind of ailments she was treating or what people die of. And they said, yeah, well, it wouldn't be malaria because we don't have it. And that came as a surprise to me because I was on anti-malarials. In fact, I have one more pill in my anti-malarial series because I haven't been home for a week yet. And that was what was recommended by the travel nurse for the health plan that I'm in. They also checked to see whether my vaccinations were up to date. Everything was. But if you haven't had yellow fever, you're going to get that shot, or at least they're going to recommend it, and I would listen to them. The night outing is very interesting because I can't see a thing. I don't have great night vision. And our guide is really just playing a light across the shore predominantly, and then sometimes in the water, looking for the reflection of an animal's eyes. He did in that fashion spot a Goliath frog. He was looking for the red unblinking eyes of a snake. Did not find one. Found a giant cane toad, a fishing bat, a 16-inch wingspan that was flying around. The other boat found a dead iguana in the river. As we went out, the fish were jumping out of the water, trying to get insects, I would assume. So an interesting but very different type of outing. Thinking of the night outings reminds me that the Amazon was just never quiet. I was planning on doing some recording of other people who were on the trip with me, and I think some of them were up to the task, but I could never find someplace that was really quiet, even when I thought I would do it like inside at the airport. Then anytime you're inside, there's air conditioning noises, but outside it sounds like this, and this is the nighttime sounds. And half the time when our guides were finding something, especially during the daylight, they were finding them not because they saw that bird in the tree or because they saw the monkeys or whatever, but they heard them and then kind of narrowed down on where that sound was coming from. So that was fascinating.
Tomorrow we're going to be exploring early morning deep into Yarapa, this Blackwater River, in search of maybe toucans, maybe more sloths, more monkeys, larger monkeys than on the area we were today. Woolly monkeys or Mongsaki monkeys, the Michael Jackson monkeys, we call it like that, because they have white hands, like the Michael Jackson wore the white gloves during his concerts. It's all black, fluffy, but very skinny one, but fluffy one. We'll see these rivers, the Amazon, the Ucayali, and the Marañón River.
And we did, in fact, see the Michael Jackson monkey or the Mongsaki monkey. We also saw for the first time pink dolphins. Pink dolphins I didn't get any pictures of because they don't come out of the water as far, but they make a sound when they come out the water. They kind of out their blowhole, which the gray dolphins don't do. So you can spot them easier in terms of when they've surfaced, but the gray dolphins will often jump out of the water. And so we saw gray dolphins and pink dolphins both for the first time I'm seeing on that. But then I think we saw them every other day going forward at this point. We saw a vulture drying its wings because vultures don't have the oil to repel water. And we'd had rain the night before. We saw paper wasps' nests. And we saw bromeliads or air pineapple. We saw a lot of great big plants that I'm more familiar with as houseplants, like great big ficus trees. We saw mimosa trees and a fish-eating hawk. The monkey follower bird. As troops of monkeys move, they scare out small insects, birds, and lizards that are eaten by this bird. Victor found a pygmy marmoset, which is the smallest of all the monkeys. And this is a monkey that weighs 120 grams or about 4 ounces. So this is clearly one that he found because of its sound. You just would not spot this in a great big jungle. But fascinating to see this little tiny monkey. We saw yet more birds. I have pictures of a black-collared hawk, a wood stork, and a boat-billed heron. That afternoon, we went back to Nanta and we toured the market, and I love a good market. We were told that for many people in the Amazon, the day they work is the day they eat. So it's a difficult life for many people where if they're not working, they may be going hungry. And so a lot of the things we saw in the market were inexpensive and local foods that someone might be able to afford, including all pieces of the chicken. Nothing was going to waste. There was a great big hall with butchers in it and fresh fish. There was a lot of salted fish. People will catch fish in this season and salt it for the high water when they won't have good fishing. And little tiny dry goods shops, a colorful market as you would expect in this part of the world. We also saw some murals that talked about some of the history of the area and some of the not great encounters with the colonizers in this area as they met the native tribes, and how legends said that if you were mistreated, you could turn yourself into a jaguar and run away. There was a beautiful city park in Nota that had a real lagoon in it that was not man-made, and that lagoon had fish that you could feed. One of the guides got a loaf of bread, and we fed the fish. And this is one of two chances we had to see an arapaima. An arapaima is a very large freshwater fish, one of the largest in the world. It can grow to be 10 feet long. The ones we saw were probably more like 5 feet long in this lagoon, but they have a swim bladder that they can use as a lung. They surface to breathe every 15 to 20 minutes. So they're a type of lungfish, and that makes them really ancient in terms of when they developed this. But it also means that they are well suited for those black water rivers and lakes we've been seeing, because the problem with those is there's very little oxygen in that water. And so other fish aren't going to survive there, but an arapaima can go up to the surface and breathe, so it can live in the black water and poorly oxygenated parts of the Amazon. But you're not going to see it. It's going to be very hard to see. So the only two times we saw it are here and then in a aquarium at the end of the trip. Before we headed back to the ship, we did a ride in what I would call a tuk-tuk. It's a motorcycle turned into a three-wheeled vehicle built by Honda here in Iquitos, although here they call them a motocarro. So cross between a motorcycle and a car. And we did a ride around the city in these colorful vehicles, which are almost the only vehicles on the road. There's these vehicles, and then there's also some wooden buses where part of the structure is made of wood that are locally built as well. Our last outing of that second full day was a day to night outing. So we went out at 5 o'clock and then stayed out past sundown at 6 o'clock, going again up one of these narrow rivers. We had a chance then to see a couple dozen squirrel monkeys, a speckled caiman, as well as a black caiman. Those are very dangerous when they're large. They can get aggressive. This was a very small one. We did not see any snakes. One of the biggest dangers to locals is snakes. There is, for instance, the fer-de-lance, which is a very venomous snake in the region, which I'm not sorry to say we did not see. We saw a fishing bat. We heard the lesser nighthawk warbling in the evening. Let me take a break here and introduce you to the Amatista, which is the boat that we were staying on during this trip. I mentioned a little bit about it earlier, but it has 3 decks. On the bottom deck is, from back to front, the galley, and then the muster station where you're going to get on and off of the skiffs, where you're going to keep all your life jackets, rubber boots for those jungle outings when you want to borrow a pair of rubber boots. And then in front of that are half the cabins. There's about 13 cabins on the boat. And then on the second deck, from back to front again, is going to be the dining room, which has seating for 31 people. They were only as many as 26 passengers, so there were always some extra seats, and people were moving around there. Serving is always done in a buffet style. Good food. I thought it was a really good presentation. Not fancy food. There was no pastry chef on board, so you'd be more likely to have a jello or a pudding for dessert than something very fancy. But I thought it was all very wonderfully done, a great variety of things. There would always be 2 entrees, and then there would be a number of starches, rice and potatoes and bread, and then some fresh vegetables, some salad, a soup. And then for lunch and dinner, there would also be dessert. Breakfast was also good. I thought the food was tasty, and it also gave us a chance to try some Peruvian cuisine, including some of the Peruvian takes on Chinese food, which is part of their cuisine now. In front of that are the remainder of the cabins, including mine. I was in 203 on the right-hand side on the front, and that's the one that has a little bit of a slope, and I think some of the other ones on the right side may also. And then in front of that is the wheelhouse, so that's where the captain is driving the boat from. And then on the third floor, again, back to front, is an enclosed room where we did all the lectures. So everything you were hearing me recorded with Eric and Victor were recorded in this reading room area. And in front of the reading room, the whole rest of the boat is the bar and then the lounge area where we really hung out much of the time. And it was interesting as we looked at some of the other boats, especially at some of the boats that looked like they were going to be a little more luxury, they had much less open area on the top deck. Ours was a covered area and had a very small area, probably because the cabins were bigger or there were more cabins or something. But that was really our favorite spot on the boat, not just because it had the bar, although one of the people on the trip did have an all-time highest bar bill, but not just because of that, but because it was a great place for people to hang out. You didn't have to hang out in your cabin, but at least until the bugs got bad in the early evening, when you could retreat to the reading room, most of the time we spent up there on that deck, including some of my favorite hours getting up there at dawn as the mist is still over the river, as a balsa raft is coming by or the local ferry or something like that, and things are waking up and the dolphins are jumping in the water nearby. That was just really my favorite spot by far. The crew was excellent. You've met Eric and Victor. They were really the two people who we spoke with the most. A lot of the rest of the crew were speaking Spanish, and it's a small crew. It's a small boat. So I think there were about 11 people total, counting the captain and the first mate who drive the boat without charts and GPS, I might add. You really just have to know the river, and the captain has 20 years on the river, and the first mate had something like that. And then you have stewards, you have the two boat drivers, you have the chef and the sous chef, the kitchen steward, the bartender, the engineer, and that's about it. We had a chance to interact with some of them because 3 different nights there was a band made up of members of the crew, including Eric and Victor, but 3 of the members of the band were real musicians who, when they're not doing this, are literally working as street musicians, quite talented, playing multiple instruments, and that was a very fun part of the experience on the boat. The next day was Wednesday, and on Wednesday we did a longer morning trip, starting early in the morning, half an hour after dawn, and took our breakfast with us. We had a lovely breakfast on breakfast trays and more food than one really needed that we ate in the boat. So we went and did our usual jungle excursion in the boat up one of the rivers, seeing lots of birds again, tropical kingbird, tiger heron, fleets of herons, seeing more pink dolphins, passing by a village that planted a stand of palm oil trees. As we're trying to attract monkeys or we're trying to attract birds, Eric is playing bird sounds or monkey sounds on a portable speaker to try and attract them. We did see the saddleback tamarin monkeys. These eat about 70% of their diet as insects and 30% are fruit. So they're sometimes kept as pets to keep the insects down in the community. And then this was macaw day. For some reason, the particular river we went up just had flocks of macaws, beautiful birds, toucan or two. We saw 5 toucans, I think, earlier in the trip, and Eric said that that was 1 toucan short of a 6-pack. If I'm doing the math correctly, that'd be 1 toucan short of a 12-pack. We had passed a local village and came back down. Interesting watching the kids in the community because we saw girls as young as, I would say, 8 years old who were paddling even younger kids in dugout canoes. So well before we would get to driving age, they would get to the age of having their own canoe and a lot of freedom to go places in ways that probably would scare me as a parent. And we had a chance to go visit this village, and one of the things we did was plant a tree. We planted a morichi palm tree, and each of the people in the group got a chance. There were pre-dug holes, and we were given a small tree and had a chance to plant it. We can go back in a few years and see if our tree has taken root. But this is, again, part of a reforestation effort that they're involving the community in. Really, the conservation plans didn't work until the communities became engaged.
For many years, the Peruvian country was struggling to protect the rainforest against the poaching. the species that we have in this area, like jaguars, and let's say red howler monkeys, also river otters, considered endangered species, were basically poached by the local people. So how to stop that? At the beginning, it was very hard until finally a little bulb light up the head of the congressman, and they decide, all right, so what we're gonna do now is to invite the natives, invite the communities to be part of the project, part of the programs of protection of the rainforest. From that point on, the programs of protections and all these projects basically start working.
Part of the change in mindset they needed was people to realize that there used to be a small number of people in the region and a great amount of resources, and now that had flipped. And their mindset was so different that to harvest the fruit, they would sometimes just chop down the tree instead of climbing the tree to pick the coconuts or whatever. While we were there, they were actually demonstrating to a different group the tree climbing techniques that they use, that they had been taught to use.
Hey, it's Paris. You know, I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
Before we left the village, those of us who wanted to, including me, got a chance to ride in a dugout canoe. We divided up into pairs, and then each of us went with a local person in a dugout canoe and paddled around the smaller river for a bit just to see what it was like. And then we had one of, I think, a lot of the people in the group's favorite activity, but it was a little intimidating because we went back, changed into our swimsuits, and those of us who were willing to went out and went for a swim. So we were swimming in a black water river right by the ranger station. And so the idea is you're swimming in a black water river because there won't be things like piranha, because they wouldn't be able to live there because there's not enough oxygen in the water. At least that's the idea, and it seemed to work because we were all fine, and it was very refreshing, and the water was very murky, so who knows what was in there with us. We all came back safely, and we're glad we had done it, but it was a little intimidating to jump in that water and not know what was joining you. Did I mention that this was an adventurous trip? I think I did. That afternoon, a small possum managed to get from the shore onto the boat, had to be corralled and taken back to the jungle where he belonged. And then we did another unusual experience, which was we had a chance to meet with a woman who is a shaman. And that alone is unusual. It's not typical that someone would be a shaman who would be a woman. So she would be someone who would be an expert in jungle plants and how to use them. And to become a shaman, she had been a shaman for 19 years. She had to spend 8 years in the jungle by herself. And first she had to purify herself. No sugar, no chemicals, no sex, no salt, no anything else that sounds like fun. She was trained by her grandfather, and you start at the age of 14. And so you're sending off 14-year-olds into the jungle by themselves to learn all of the plants and how to use them. She currently has 2 disciples who have been with her for 2 years who are also learning the trade, as it were. She was elected via an ayahuasca ceremony. You've probably heard of ayahuasca, and that is a hallucinogen that is used in ceremonies. We did not do an ayahuasca ceremony. I'm not sure that G would have gone for that, but also to do that for 2 days beforehand, you also need to cleanse yourself from salt, sugar, fat, sex, and anything else that's fun. And then you also can't do an ayahuasca ceremony if you have high blood pressure. But the idea is that you use this to see into the past or to see into the future. And it was during one of these ceremonies that she was identified as someone who would become a shaman. She greeted us with the smoke from 5 different typical tropical plants to cleanse any possible negativity. I don't know if she was targeting specifically me, but I was trying to keep an open mind. There are certainly cures the jungle. I think everybody agrees to that. And Victor had had an experience where he was basically dying. He had a bloody flux where he had basically bloody diarrhea for 2 years and went to many, many Western doctors who were not able to cure him. But this particular shaman was able to cure him. And the cure had both a medicinal and a spiritual component because she felt that somebody had put a curse on him. It's an interesting experience to talk to her about what kind of things she's treating and how she's treating it with different things. And then a couple people in the group had a chance to say, well, I've got neuropathy, and she would rub something on their ankles, or I've had this pain in my head. Well, it seems to be from tension. And then she would rub something on her back. And she does her shaman work for free, although certainly takes donations if somebody wants to do that. And then at the end of this experience, and I should say at the end of all of the different village experiences, there's a chance to purchase local handicrafts. A lot of these would be made from palm leaves. There were some interesting palm leaves woven into different jungle creatures. There were other types of art and jewelry and such, both with her and people from her village that had made, as well as the other village trips that we've talked about already on the show. That was Wednesday. On Thursday, we did our first jungle walk, talk about other things that are intimidating. And this was the more difficult jungle walk because we walked into the jungle on that what they call terra firma. That is the dry ground, that 5% of the land that doesn't flood. And we walked uphill. The higher ground is what's going to be that doesn't flood. And we were hiking to get to a series of suspension bridges. There normally are 8 of them, although the lightning strike had made it so that we could only go on 4 of them. And so that was our target, was to hike all the way about a mile into the jungle. And that's a lot harder than hiking a mile on a city street. Think of it as twice as much work. And as we're walking along, it is relatively wet. It has been raining. It will rain while we're on this hike. It is a rainforest. So I would say the ground is more terra than firma. There was mud. I took the advice of wearing the rubber boots that were available on the boat for just this purpose. We saw kapok trees, the kapok trees that we talked about earlier. And then we also saw a mahogany tree. A mahogany tree would be one of those that has been overforested. Very rare to find one that is this close to the shore. Usually the only surviving old growth mahogany trees are much further away. Eric had told us more about different trees in the area.
What kind of trees we're talking about? We are talking about the kapok, the famous kapok tree. Probably you're not very familiar with kapok, but how about if I say plywood? Are you familiar with plywood? Very fine laminate of wood that it was produced out of the kapok tree. This kapok tree, which is nowadays Ceiba pentandra, used to measure way up to 180 feet high. We need at least 30 or 40 people gathering from the hands to go around the tree in order to measure the girth of the tree. So it's a gigantic tree. We nicknamed this tree based on one of the trees that you got in the United States. And this is the famous sequoia. So nowadays we call the Amazon sequoia. Unfortunately, we don't have many of these trees because at the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s, at the end of the 80s also, this particular species of kapok, it was overexploited. We sent this out to Europe, to the United States. We sold out a lot of this wood, not thinking that one day it was going to be considered endangered. We also have the rosewood. Are you familiar with rosewood? What do you know about rosewood? In the 20s, the last century, the rosewood was overexploited. That was the second exploited tree after the rubber trees, because the rubber trees exploitation happened in 1879 and extended all the way up to 1920. So in 1920, finally, the rubber boom disappeared, finally collapsed in the Amazon rainforest of Peru or in the Amazon in South America, and finally they start with another one. What was that? Rosewood. What do we do in our day with rosewood? Probably you ladies heard about cologne, a perfume called Chanel No. 5. If you ever use Chanel No. 5, you should know that Chanel No. 5 is made out of the rosewood. So the essence, the nice aroma, rosewood. Now we are protecting this. We are protecting the rosewood, and we are replanting, reforesting different areas of the Amazon with rosewood because it has a very good commercial value, I would say.
The area we were hiking, including those suspension bridges, were built as part of an old failed attempt to put a resort here. There were numerous resorts that we saw along the way, including the Treehouse, which is one that looked pretty interesting that had some treehouse type features to it. But this one had failed when the owner had died. There were still trails that went up into the jungle there, so we were following a very well marked trail and also one where someone had put down segments of trees to have almost like pavers on the path. But there was still a lot of mud and such that you're hiking through, and then got out there to those suspension bridges, which my fear of heights made a little challenging, but they were fairly sturdy, although they creaked when you walked on them. And in between the four segments, you were obviously standing on a tree with other members of your group. We broke into groups of four, and somebody would step onto the platform and it would kind of sink a little, which was a little disconcerting. But along the way there, we saw small trees that may even be older than some of the bigger trees, but they're waiting for the old trees to die because then they'll get the sunlight to grow. We see trees that have grown almost flying buttress supports because most of these trees have very short roots. And so those that have the flying buttresses may live as long as 300 years, but the other ones will probably fall over within 50 years. We saw social spiders, which is a group of small spiders that live in sort of a communal web. There's something for your nightmares. And speaking of spiders, we saw a tarantula, the largest I think that I've ever seen, probably the size of my hand to the first knuckle. Even in my pictures of it, which are very clear, it's hard to see because it's fairly camouflaged. The soil in the terra firma, in that part that doesn't get flooded every year, as I said earlier, is not as good a soil as all of that that's getting that fresh silt washed in every year from the flooding. We saw an Anacaspi hardwood tree, and the Amatista's hull is made out of this particular hardwood tree. And again, hardwood tree is getting much more scarce, and they're trying to do more replanting of that. And I loved just the perfect moment here is we saw a little caterpillar, and someone reached out to touch it. And Victor, I think it was, said, "Don't touch it. It can be toxic." Because you're in the rainforest, pretty much everything can kill you. And this was probably the moment where we really noticed that more than when you're just in the boat. This was also when we were feeling the humidity more. I was as damp as if you had thrown me in that Blackwater River again, just soaking through my shirt, and wished I'd brought 2 water bottles instead of just one, because we were out for about 2.5 hours on this walk. We saw a white tree that Victor said that was white because it had been attacked by a fungus, and if we'd been there at night, the tree would have been incandescent. We saw philodendrons, and bullet ants eat the seeds from the philodendron, and the seed sprouts in them, kills them like something out of Alien, and then grows out of them. And so there's a point at which you can see a bullet ant that the seed has sprouted. They haven't died yet, but there's a beginning of a plant growing out of them, which again is the stuff of nightmares. We heard elusive tamarin monkeys, although we didn't see them. We saw a bullfrog. We saw a rubber tree, in fact, a rubber tree that someone at one time had tapped. So very interesting hike, but a little more challenging. They did a long hike and a short hike, and both were a little challenging. The longer one, obviously, more challenging. But on the other hand, those suspension bridges were really cool, and it was great to get all the way out there. So I'm very glad that I did that trip. The only thing I would do different is probably put on a little more DEET, because I did get bites, and also take another water bottle. And then the next outing we did was a home lunch. So we went into one of the villages, and they cooked for us some of their typical meals. We had a chance to see their house. The main room of the house was a big empty room, no beds, no furniture. And so they would roll out their bedding in the evening on the hardwood floor. They had 11 kids. It's still not uncommon for larger families here because the kids are helping plant the rice and all the other things you need to do. This particular household belonged to a Catholic offshoot religion that came in from Brazil, whose name escapes me. They showed us a big fish that they had caught locally, and then they smoked that fish. That was part of the lunch. And then they also served a dish that was chicken and eggs and olives and rice that were wrapped up in plant leaves. Now, the only part of that that wouldn't come locally would be the olives. Those would be imported from the Lima area.
And also black pepper and garlic, guisador, turmeric, turmeric. She actually mixed up all that with the rice, stirring it here. And then also she got, the chicken drums over here, or chicken legs. All that is semi-cooked, by the way, not very well cooked. We got, olives and then, hard-boiled eggs. All that, it will be presented, This is the leaf we call maranta leaf. It's a leaf that we use because of flexibility and oil. At the same time, expel a nice flavor that will be impregnated right in the rice and the chicken at the same time. This dish is presented especially in June. June is the time when we celebrate the Farmer's Day. So our Catholic community will celebrate the St. John Baptist, the patron of the communities.
There was plantains, there was drinks then, lemongrass tea, tapioca drink, and a banana smoothie. But what they did is the Amatista brought purified water for them to use for all the drinks. So they try to make sure that this is an opportunity to experience a local meal, to meet some local people, but in a safe way. They still do have high child mortality is one of the reasons they still have a number of kids in the area. And they also get married and start having kids a lot younger. Think 14 or 16 years old is pretty typical. They actually used to have longer life expectancies. Victor was telling us, Victor, whose people are the Jaguar people, so he's from the jungle, as is Eric. Victor was telling us there are still uncontacted indigenous people in Peru's Amazon, although much further in, obviously. And during that December to May time, which is the flooded season, that is a real time of scarcity. And so that's when they're eating salted fish and dried yucca or tapioca. And Eric was also telling us in the old days, if you wanted to marry my daughter, I might have you chop down this tree and you have an hour to do it to make sure you would be a good provider. But one of the reasons why their life expectancies has gotten a little shorter recently is their diet has changed, because as the populations have grown, they have overconsumed some things like turtles. They used to eat the turtle eggs, and that was one of their sources for calcium. And so now they have a diet that is difficult to get calcium. One of the ways they do it is by eating bony fish and just chopping up the bones really fine. As part of the village visit after the meal, we also saw the dyeing of different palm fronds for some of these handicrafts we've been seeing them weave, but what were the natural dyes they were using and where did these colors come from? So that was also very interesting. Back on the ship that evening, we learned how to make a pisco sour, and we're all given a pisco sour so we could try that national drink of Peru. And then the next day was going to be a big deal because this was going to be when we went piranha fishing. On the way out there, we saw Jesus Christ birds, and they're called that because they seem to walk on water, and that is the jacana bird. We learned that voting in Peru was mandatory. If you can't get to the voting booth, then you'll have to pay a fine of $60. And if you can't pay the fine, you can't conduct many types of transactions, getting licenses or anything like that with the government until you pay your fine. So there's great incentive to get to the voting booth. If you're on the river, you'd have to go and vote. You wouldn't be able to vote just in your local village. We saw a cardinal, and then we basically, with some directions from some locals, found a spot to do piranha fishing. And the way you do piranha fishing, we had a stick for a fishing pole, a line on it with a hook, and on the hook it was baited with beef. And then you take the tip of the stick and you kind of stir it in the water to get the attention of the piranha. You dip in the hook with the beef on it, and then when the line goes taut, you jerk it to try and set the hook and pull the piranha out. Almost everybody in our boat caught a piranha. I think there were two of us who didn't. I was one of them. I was just feeding the piranha, not so much catching them.
All right. I got you. All right. Oh, whoa. What a monster. Hey, Chris, that was your fish, I guess.
Yeah, that was the one that kept getting my bait, yeah.
Oh, bring it. Oh, wow. Look at that fish.
Don't lose it. I'm the winner.
Oh, whoa, look at, we are not going to miss that. Wait a minute.
Now, in audio, you can't tell that these are not very big piranha. They grow bigger than we were catching. The bigger ones would be deeper at this time of year, and we were catching ones that were maybe 8 inches long, I want to say. Or to be fair, the others were catching ones that were about 8 inches long at longest, and some even shorter than that. Now, in the movies, if you fall into the river and it has piranhas, you're eaten alive and it takes about a minute. That's sort of true in the sense that if you have piranhas in great numbers and they have eaten all the fish in the area, then anything that drops in, like a cattle or a person, would get the flesh stripped off in about a minute. But that's only in those special circumstances. They would rather eat fish. Our last experience from the boat was yet another hike. This was a shorter hike than the first one, a bit easier. On the way, they were pointing out medicinal plants that you can find in the jungle, like Ficus insipida, which helps with parasites, or candlestick flower, which is in the ginger family, which is used for high fever. We saw spikes on trees that they use for natural graters, more tamarin monkeys, dead leaf toad-like frog, bats in the hollow of a tree, palm fibers. This time we saw an anaconda, and that is something that certainly some members of the group could have gone without seeing. It was a large anaconda that was lying on the ground in between some of the roots of a tree, and it had shed its skin. And we got perhaps a little close because it did a mock strike. Now, these are not venomous snakes, they are constrictors, but I would have to say that at least two people jumped into me because it was rather startling to see the snake act as if it were going to strike out. We also had one of those plants you should not touch. We saw a curare tree, and these are the ones that were used on the poison darts back in the day when they were firing poison darts, either in warfare or in hunting. You had to be very careful when you used it hunting to make sure that you drained the blood from whatever you killed with the poison dart so that you did not kill yourself when you went to eat the meat. It is these days used in anti-venom. An interesting hike, shorter hike. And then it was time to go home. It was time to start that long journey home. So on Saturday, we got off the boat at about 8:30. We made one stop on the way to the airport, and that was about an hour we spent at the Manatee Rescue Center. And if you happen to be in Iquitos, this is something I would recommend. It's about a half hour out of town. Not only are there manatees, a little smaller than the Florida manatees that they rescue there, but there are also a number of other animals. There are lots and lots of birds in the sanctuary, mostly ones that have been taken by poachers, like toucans and macaws and parrots. There was also a peccary, arapima, that fish that we talked about, that really long fish that can breathe using its swim bladder like a lung. And then we also saw our only capybara on this trip. We did not see one in the wild, but we did see one at this Manatee Rescue Center there that was, I would say, the size of a medium-sized dog and was not fully grown. So this is the world's largest rodent, and it's pretty darn big. And then we got on the plane and flew to Lima. The rest of the group then finished the trip in normal fashion, which meant they went back down to Miraflores, spent one night at the same hotel, the Radisson Red, which is included in the price of the tour, before flying out or continuing on the next day. I actually left the group at the airport and stayed at an airport hotel because I had an early morning flight. That kind of wraps up the trip. So as we get to some of the advice that I would have before you take this trip. One, again, remember, bring your sense of adventure, bring your DEET insect repellent, bring long sleeve shirts and long pants, preferably lightweight. They'll give you a packing guide when you join the trip. Before we get to the wrap-up questions, let me tell you a little bit about my traveling companions. We had the one family of 3 from Peru who were only there for a couple nights. Didn't get to know them quite as well. And then we had 4 people from Canada. We had 3 from Australia. We had 4 from England, 1 from China, 2 from Germany, and the rest of us, I don't know how many that leaves, were from the US. We had 2 people right out of college, and then the oldest person in the group was 90, and she was impressive. She had had an aortic aneurysm last year, and before she went in for surgery, when it wasn't clear she would come out, she said to her family, if I come out of this, I'm taking whoever wants to go to the Amazon. And 2 of her daughters and 2 of her granddaughters joined her. And she needed some help up and down those stairs and those steep banks, but she was fearless, and I hope I'm doing that well when I'm 90. But it does point out that some mobility or some help is going to be necessary for a trip like this. But they were a great group of traveling companions and made the trip a lot of fun. And then getting to our wrap-up questions. I am standing in the prettiest spot in the Amazon region of Peru. Where am I standing? What am I looking at? And that's tough. It certainly might include a colorful bird, but I'm going to pick instead one of those early morning on the river, standing on the 3rd deck there and in that open space, looking out with the dolphins jumping in the water and the mist rising from the water and the jungle just waking up and the sound of birds. That just was my happy place. One thing that makes me laugh and say only in the Peruvian Amazon, I think it was that moment of somebody reaching out to touch a fuzzy caterpillar and being told, don't touch that, it could be toxic. Just a good reminder of you are in the rainforest and there's quite a huge variety of things out there, including trees that you don't want to touch because the sap is deadly, like curare. So it is an interesting place. Again, not as intimidating as I thought it would be, but a pretty cool place. And if I had to summarize the region in just 3 words, I would say floods. That whole thing with the flooding of the river and how much that affected everything, it just really sticks with me. Wildlife. And then birds. I'm going to specialize birds separate because that's the thing that always shows up. If you are a birder, this is definitely a trip you should do. And if you're not, it might just make you into one because there's some amazing birds there in that Amazon region.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso Virtual Coffee Machines. Ready to enjoy the bold flavors of barista-quality Nespresso iced coffee at home? Simply fill a glass with ice and press the brew button on your virtual pop machine to enjoy rich double espressos roasted to stand up even when chilled. Refreshingly bold iced coffee. Refreshingly easy to make at home. Visit Nespresso.com to shop now.
Switch to Shiseido Benefiance Wrinkle Smoothing Eye Cream and discover why people are calling it the best eye cream. A powerhouse formula that targets 5 types of eye area wrinkles. 96% of users saw reduced wrinkles and diminished dark circles after just 7 days. Shop Shiseido Benefiance Wrinkle Smoothing Eye Cream at Sephora and discover how change can happen in the blink of an eye. Consumer tested by 110 women.
Thanks, as always, to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially. You can learn more at patreon.com/amateurtraveler. New on the blog since the last episode is nothing, but hopefully I'll be writing a new blog post tomorrow, but I've spent a lot of time trying to put this episode together this week. Remember, again, we've got another G-Adventure trip coming up, and that's in May, and that's to Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. If you're interested in joining me, either just drop me an email for information or go to amateurtraveler.com/trips, which is the private Facebook group where we plan these things. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. Join the newsletter. If you have any questions, leave a comment on this episode or drop me an email to chris2x@gmail.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
This episode is brought to you by FX's Alien Earth, the official podcast. Each week, host Adam Rogers is joined by guests, including the show's creator, cast, and crew, in this exclusive companion podcast. They will explore story elements, deep dive into character motivations, and offer an episode-by-episode behind-the-scenes breakdown of each terrifying chapter in this new series. Search FX's Alien Earth wherever you listen to podcasts.